You know that feeling when you stand up, take a few steps, and your body reminds you exactly how many birthdays you've had. The knees click, the hips complain, and one flight of stairs feels like a mini workout. Meanwhile, every bottle on the shelf is screaming the same promise: just take more fish oil. But here's the twist almost nobody tells you. What if the oil you've been relying on isn't the quiet hero, but part of the problem? And what if the thing that actually helps you walk like you're 40 again is a cheap, boring-looking oil you've probably walked past in the grocery store 100 times? For most people, getting older slowly turns into a negotiation with pain. You stop kneeling on the floor because it isn't worth the struggle to get back up. You lean on the railing going downstairs, not because you're weak, but because your joints feel unpredictable. Friends invite you for a walk, and you start scanning for excuses before you even answer. Deep down, it's not laziness. It's fear. Fear that your knees will flare, your back will lock, or that embarrassing moment will happen again where you have to say, "Hey, can we stop for a minute? My joints are killing me." The strange thing is, a lot of people with those exact problems are already doing the right things. They're taking fish oil, they're trying joint supplements, they're even stretching more than they used to. Yet every morning still starts with the same slow shuffle to the bathroom, the same careful steps down the stairs, the same mental calculation before every movement. Is this going to hurt? That constant background stress, that constant negotiating with your own body, is what really makes you feel old. Here's the part nobody explained properly. Feeling old and feeling inflamed are almost the same sensation. When inflammation builds up inside your joints, your body stops moving like it used to. You feel heavier, slower, stiffer. You think it's just age, but a huge chunk of that feeling comes from tiny inflammatory signals constantly buzzing inside your knees, your hips, your spine. And the longer they stay turned on, the more your body forgets what it felt like to move freely. Inside those joints, there are little chemical messengers being made all day long. Some of them calm things down. Some of them turn the heat up. When your body starts making too many of the heat up messengers, the joint lining swells, the cartilage gets stressed, and the nerves around the joint become extra sensitive. That's when you start hearing and feeling every step. Scientists call some of these messengers inflammatory eicosanoids, but you don't need the fancy word to know what they feel like. They feel like that dull ache that never really goes away. They feel like the grinding you hear when you stand up. They feel like the way your knees warn you about the weather before the forecast does. For years, fish oil was sold as the perfect antidote to all of this. And to be fair, omega-3 fats do play an important role in the body, especially when it comes to heart and brain health. But here's where the story gets messy. Those same omega-3 fats are incredibly delicate. They go bad easily. Several tests on commercial fish oil capsules have found that a lot of them are already oxidized or partially rancid by the time they even reach consumers. That means instead of pouring calm, cool oil on the fire of inflammation, you might be pouring in fats that your body now has to clean up and defend against. Some research suggests that oxidized fish oils can increase oxidative stress in tissues, at least in animal studies, and scientists are still debating exactly how that plays out in humans. So you get this strange situation. People swallow capsule after capsule, notice little to no change in their joints, and assume their body is just broken. In reality, they might be taking a product that simply doesn't match what their joints actually need, or they're relying on one single supplement to fix a much bigger imbalance. That's where this cheap, easily ignored oil steps out of the background and quietly steals the spotlight. Instead of asking, "How much fish oil do I need?" a better question is, what kind of fats are actually flowing through my joints all day long? Because your joints aren't just made of bone and cartilage. They're lined with membranes built from fats. They're filled with a slippery fluid that relies on the right fats to stay thick and smooth. Your body uses those fats every single day to decide whether it should dial inflammation up or bring it back down. Now, there's a particular kind of fat that doesn't get nearly as much attention in the mainstream as fish oil, but it's been studied for decades. It's called gamma-linolenic acid, or GLA. GLA is a special type of omega 6 fat that your body can convert into compounds that tend to be more calming and balancing, especially in the context of inflammation. Clinical trials in people with inflammatory joint conditions have found that GLA, taken in the right amounts and often combined with standard medical treatments, can reduce joint tenderness and improve overall symptoms over time. It's not a magic bullet or a cure, but it's strong enough that researchers have been looking at it very seriously for years. GLA shows up in a few different plant oils: evening primrose oil, borage oil, black currant seed oil, and in some high GLA varieties of safflower. One of the reasons this matters is that these plant-based sources are generally more stable than fish oil when stored properly. They don't carry the same concerns about heavy metals that come with some fish products. And when they're used in sensible amounts, within an overall healthy diet, they can shift the body away from constantly producing those heat-up, inflammatory messengers and toward more soothing, resolving ones. Here's where the grocery store moment becomes interesting. You've probably walked down that oil aisle and glanced at bottles of safflower oil without thinking twice. It looks plain. It looks cheap. It definitely doesn't scream joint support from the label. But in certain high linoleic or high GLA forms, safflower oil can provide the raw materials your body uses to build more flexible cell membranes and more balanced inflammatory signals. Some newer research on seed oils and linoleic acid in general even suggests that, when they replace saturated fats in the diet and aren't abused at very high frying temperatures, they can support healthier inflammation markers and better metabolic health overall, rather than making things worse. Picture what happens when the balance shifts inside a joint. The soft lining that produces synovial fluid calms down. The fluid itself becomes a little thicker, a little more slippery. The cartilage stops getting hammered by a constant chemical storm. The little nerve endings that once fired at the smallest movement start to quiet. You stand up, and for the first time in a long time, you don't brace yourself for that sharp reminder in your knees. You walk across the room and realize you're not thinking about every step. That's the difference between living in a body that's constantly inflamed and living in a body that finally has space to repair. Of course, no oil by itself can erase years of joint wear or override every other choice you make. If someone lives on processed food, rarely moves, sleeps badly, and is constantly stressed, their joints are going to complain no matter what they drizzle on their salad. But when you start combining smarter fats with reasonable movement, better sleep, and a more balanced plate, things often shift much faster than people expect. It's like giving your body permission to do a job it's been trying to do for years. Clean up the damage, calm the noise, and rebuild. So how does this connect to feeling like you're walking in a younger body again? Think about what young movement really is. It's not about running marathons or doing splits. It's about trust. When you're younger, you trust your knees to catch you. You trust your hips to rotate. You trust your ankles to stabilize without thinking. Inflammation erases that trust. Every step becomes a question mark. When inflammation drops, that trust slowly returns. You stop overthinking every movement. You stop guarding every joint. Walking becomes automatic again, instead of a careful chore. Inside the cell membranes that line your joints, GLA and other healthy fats help keep those membranes soft and flexible. You can imagine every cell wrapped in a tiny bubble. When you're younger and less inflamed, those bubbles are like soft, bouncy cushions. Nutrients move in easily, waste moves out easily, and the cell can do its job. When inflammation and oxidative stress rise, those bubbles stiffen. They turn more like brittle plastic than soft rubber. Everything slows down. Repair takes longer. Signals get distorted. You feel that as stiffness, as heaviness, as the sense that your body is always a little behind you. By changing the fats you feed your body, especially over weeks and months, you change the material those cell bubbles are made from. That's why people who adjust their fat intake toward more stable, plant-based oils and balanced omega-3 sources often report not just less joint discomfort, but also clearer thinking, better energy, and an overall lighter feeling. They didn't swap their skeleton. They swapped the materials that surround and support it. There's another villain quietly working against your joints that almost never shows up on supplement labels: oxidative stress. You can think of oxidative stress as a kind of internal rusting. Every time you move, your joints create tiny amounts of friction, and that friction produces free radicals, highly reactive molecules that can damage tissue if they build up faster than your body can neutralize them. When you're young, your antioxidant systems keep up just fine. As the years pass, and especially if your diet and lifestyle aren't ideal, that balance tips. The free radicals pile up, the rust spreads, and the cartilage that should feel like a thick, springy sponge starts to feel more like a dried-out kitchen pad. The fats you eat can either make that rusting worse or help your body stay ahead of it. Already oxidized fats, like badly stored oils or rancid fish oil capsules, are like dragging rusty metal into an already fragile system. Your body has to spend energy dealing with them before it can get back to repairing your joints. In contrast, fresher, more stable oils that resist oxidation help your membranes stay intact and give your natural antioxidants a fighting chance to keep the rust under control. That's one reason why the quality of the oil, the way it's stored, and the amount you use matter just as much as the name on the label. Now, there's a huge myth floating around that all omega-6 fats are bad and all omega-3 fats are good. The reality is more nuanced. Your body actually needs both. Omega-6 and omega-3 fats share the same enzymes and pathways, and they compete for space in your cell membranes. The problem isn't that omega-6 exists. The problem is when most of your omega-6 comes from heavily processed, repeatedly fried foods, and almost none of your fats come from whole, gently handled sources. That's like giving your body a construction crew made entirely of exhausted workers with dull tools. When omega-6 comes from better sources, like certain unrefined plant oils, nuts, and seeds, and when it's paired with enough omega-3s from things like flax, chia, walnuts, or modest portions of fatty fish, something very different happens. Instead of creating a constant stream of inflammatory signals, your body starts producing more of the molecules that actively resolve inflammation. It becomes better at starting the healing process and, just as importantly, better at ending it when the work is done. You can imagine your immune system as a team of firefighters. In a healthy, balanced system, they show up when there's a problem, put out the flames, and then go back to the station. In an imbalanced system, they never get the message to leave. They keep spraying water long after the fire is out, soaking the whole neighborhood in the process. Balanced fats help deliver the stand-down order. They tell the firefighters that it's safe to pack up and go home so your tissues can dry out, repair, and return to normal. So where does this leave you? Standing there with aching knees, wondering if any of this actually makes a difference in real life? Imagine a simple, realistic scenario. Someone in their late 60s decides they're tired of feeling twice their age every morning. They don't try to rebuild their life overnight. They just make a few strategic changes. They start using a tablespoon of a high linoleic safflower oil as their main salad or drizzle oil instead of always reaching for butter or shortening. They add a few servings of whole food omega-3 sources during the week. They make an effort to walk a bit each day, even if it's just around the block. They prioritize going to bed a little earlier most nights. For the first few days, nothing dramatic happens. The stairs still creak, the joints still grumble. But somewhere around the 2 or 3 week mark, small hints start to appear. Getting out of a chair doesn't require as much bracing. The first steps in the morning feel less like walking on glass and more like walking on slightly stiff carpet. Another week or 2 passes, and they catch themselves halfway through the day realizing they haven't thought about their knees yet. That moment, wait, I forgot about my joints today, is one of the clearest signs that inflammation has finally stepped out of the spotlight. Of course, everyone's body is different. Some people notice changes sooner, some later, and some may need more comprehensive support from a healthcare professional, physical therapy, or medical treatment. Oils and food-based strategies are tools, not magic spells. They can support the work your body is already trying to do, but they don't replace personalized medical advice or treatment. If you're dealing with significant joint pain or an inflammatory condition, It's always worth talking with your doctor or a qualified health provider before making big changes or starting any new supplement routine. Still, it's empowering to know that something as ordinary as the oil in your kitchen can quietly influence how your joints feel day after day. You don't need experimental injections, you don't need a cabinet full of mystery pills, and you don't need to spend a fortune to support healthier movement. Sometimes, it starts with a slightly different choice at the grocery store and a bit of patience while your body rebuilds itself from the inside out. The deeper you look, the more you realize that walking like you're 40 again is less about chasing youth and more about creating the internal environment your joints need to behave like younger joints. Lower inflammation, less oxidative stress, better membrane flexibility, more balanced fats, efficient repair. Those are the real levers. High-quality plant oils, including certain forms of safflower oil, can be one piece of that puzzle, especially when they're used to replace harsher, more heavily processed fats. If you decide to experiment with this approach, do it the smart way. Choose a fresh, high-quality oil. Store it away from heat and light. Use it in ways that respect its nature, on salads, over cooked vegetables, in gentle recipes, rather than blasting it in a smoking hot pan. Pair it with real foods, plenty of color on your plate, and movement that challenges your joints just enough to remind them what they were designed to do. And as always, loop your healthcare provider into the conversation so what you're doing with your diet lines up with any medications or conditions you might have. A few months from now, your reflection in the mirror might not look dramatically different. The number on your birthday cake won't change, but the way you move through your day absolutely can. The distance you're willing to walk, the way you rise from a chair, the confidence you feel stepping off a curb, all of that is negotiable. Your joints are not frozen in time. They're living tissues, constantly responding to the messages you send them through your food, your movement, your sleep, and your stress. Change those messages, and over time, your joints will start to answer differently. So the next time you hear someone say, "Well, what do you expect? I'm just getting old," remember this. Age is a number. Inflammation is a process, and processes can be influenced. If you're willing to give your body better materials, better oils, better balance, better care, you might just catch yourself one day walking across the room, climbing the stairs, or strolling outside and thinking, "You know what? I don't feel my age right now." And that quiet realization, that simple, pain-lighter walk, is worth far more than any flashy promise on a bottle. To really see how this can play out, imagine someone like Carla. She's 72, retired, and used to love gardening. Over the years, the kneeling, bending, and hauling bags of soil started to catch up with her. She tried the usual route: pain creams, a couple of different joint supplements, even a high-dose fish oil she ordered after watching a late-night ad. Some days were better than others, but the overall trend was clear. Every spring, the garden felt a little bigger, the tools felt a little heavier, and the joy she used to feel planting flowers slowly got replaced by anxiety about how sore she'd be the next morning. One day, visiting her daughter, she opened the pantry and noticed a bottle of safflower oil next to the olive oil. They started talking, and her daughter mentioned she'd been reading about using different oils to support joint-friendly eating, along with exercise and better sleep. Carla didn't change everything overnight. She simply began swapping some of her usual cooking fats with small amounts of that oil, adding more colorful vegetables to her plate, and setting a goal to walk around the block after breakfast instead of collapsing straight into her favorite chair. At first, nothing seemed different. Her joints were still noisy, and some mornings still felt stiff. But she kept going, mostly because the changes weren't difficult. A drizzle of this instead of that, a short walk instead of scrolling on her phone, a glass of water instead of a second soda. A few weeks in, she noticed something subtle. She could stand at the kitchen counter longer without shifting her weight every few minutes. When she knelt down to pull a stubborn weed, she realized she didn't need to grip the fence to get back up quite as hard. These weren't miracles. They were tiny signals that her body was responding to the new environment she was creating. By the end of the season, her garden was still work, but it wasn't punishment. She still felt tired after a long day outside. but it was the satisfying tiredness of having done something she loved, not the defeated tiredness of having fought with her own joints all afternoon. That's the kind of change people mean when they talk about turning back the clock. Not erasing years, but removing the extra weight inflammation adds to every single movement. Now zoom back inside the body for a second. When you start feeding your system better oils, the balance of omega-6 and omega-3 in your blood, your cell membranes, and your joint fluid slowly shifts. Studies that look at people's blood levels of these fats often find that a very high omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is linked with higher rates of chronic pain and inflammation. But here's the important nuance. It's not about avoiding every seed oil forever. It's about where those oils come from, how they're used, and whether they're paired with enough omega-3s from whole foods. If your main source of omega-6 is cheap fried food and ultra-processed snacks, you're sending one kind of message to your body. If your omega-6 comes from modest amounts of fresher, high-quality plant oils, used in place of solid saturated fats, and you make sure that omega-3 rich foods show up in your week, you're sending a very different message. The first message says, keep the fire smoldering. The second says, do your job, repair the tissue, and then stand down. This is where safflower oil's reputation gets interesting. For years, the internet has been full of arguments about seed oils, with some voices insisting they're the root of all modern health problems. But large reviews and newer studies don't really support the idea that moderate use of these oils, especially when they replace less healthy fats, automatically drives inflammation sky high. In fact, some research suggests that higher levels of linoleic acid, the main fat in many seed oils, are linked with better heart health and lower markers of inflammation when they're part of an overall balanced diet. That doesn't mean you should start drinking oil or drowning every meal in it. Fats are dense, and more is not always better. What it does mean is that the story is more complex than all seed oils are bad. The quality, the amount, and the context matter. A tablespoon of a fresh, well-handled oil on a bowl of vegetables is a very different thing from the same oil reheated in a deep fryer dozens of times. When you hear someone say, avoid this entire category forever, it's usually a sign that the nuance got lost. Another overlooked piece of the puzzle is how these oils interact with the rest of your lifestyle. Picture your body as a city. Inflammation is like traffic. Some is normal. People have to move around. But when every road is jammed all day, nothing works. Food is one of the ways you control the traffic lights. Movement is another. Sleep is literally when the city does overnight repairs. Stress is like a constant siren blaring in the background, making everyone more jumpy and reactive. You don't fix traffic by changing one intersection and ignoring the rest of the system. So when you bring in a better oil to support your joints, see it as a helping hand, not a superhero cape. Use it to nudge the system in the right direction while you also work on giving your body the basics it's been begging for. A little more movement, a little more rest, a little more real food, and a little less chaos. If you're wondering how to actually fit this into your day without turning your life upside down, start simple. Maybe breakfast is where you make your first move. Instead of skipping it or grabbing something ultra-processed, you build a quick bowl of oats, fruit, and a sprinkle of nuts or seeds, and you add a tiny drizzle of safflower or another healthy oil on top. At lunch, you use that oil to dress a salad or to finish a soup instead of relying on a heavy cream-based dressing. At dinner, you cook most of your meal with gentler methods like baking or steaming, then add your oil at the end for flavor and support instead of frying everything from start to finish. Over time, those little choices add up in a very literal way. The actual physical stuff your joints are built from begins to change. The membranes, the synovial fluid, the cartilage, they all reflect what you put into your body day after day. That's why the results don't usually show up after a single meal, but they can start to show up surprisingly quickly once you're consistent. There is one more mental shift that really helps people stay on track. Instead of thinking, I'm using this oil to fix my pain, think, I'm using this oil to support my body while it does the fixing. That may sound like a small difference, but it changes your expectations. It keeps you from giving up after a week because you're not suddenly 20 years younger. It reminds you that your body is not your enemy. It's your teammate. It's been trying to repair those joints all along. It just needed the conditions to improve. If you've relied heavily on fish oil in the past, none of this means you made a bad choice or harmed yourself. Quality fish oil, used properly and stored well, can still be helpful for many people, especially for heart and brain health. The point here is not to create a new villain. It's to show you that there is another path, one that uses low-cost, plant-based oils in a smarter, more intentional way, especially for joint comfort and day-to-day mobility. What really changes the game is understanding that the everyday oils you use, on your vegetables, in your skillet, in your baking, can either quietly work against your joints or quietly work with them. Once you see that, it's hard to unsee it. Every time you pick up a bottle, you're not just choosing a flavor. You're choosing a building material for the inner lining of your knees and hips. So if the idea of walking more smoothly, standing up more confidently, and taking the stairs without wincing appeals to you, it may be worth giving that boring bottle of safflower oil a second look. Not as a miracle, not as a shortcut, but as one more smart, simple tool in your corner. And remember, anything that affects inflammation can interact with medications or conditions you might have. So before you make big changes, especially if you're on blood thinners, anti-inflammatory drugs, or have a diagnosed joint or autoimmune condition, check in with your healthcare provider. Share what you're planning, ask your questions, and make sure what you're doing fits safely into your overall plan. The goal is not just to move more like you did at 40. It's to do it in a way that respects the body you have now. At the end of the day, this whole conversation comes down to one powerful idea. Your joints are not fixed in the condition they're in today. They are constantly turning over, constantly responding, constantly listening to what you feed them and how you live. You may not be able to change your age, but you can absolutely influence how old your body feels when you move. So the next time you're in the grocery store and you stroll past that row of familiar bottles, pause for just a moment. Somewhere between the fancy labels and the budget brands is a simple, unpretentious oil that might help your body send very different messages to your joints in the weeks ahead. Pair it with better choices, a little patience, and a bit of daily movement, and you may find yourself one ordinary morning, stepping out of bed, walking down the hall, and realizing with quiet surprise, this is what younger used to feel like. That's the real promise hidden in that plain bottle. Not a rewind button, not a magic cure, but a gentle nudge that helps your body remember how to move with less noise, less resistance, and a lot more ease. Before we wrap this up, let's pull everything into something you can remember every time your joints start talking a little too loudly. First, recognize what that stiffness actually is. It's not your body betraying you. Most of the time, it's your body waving a flag that says, "There's too much irritation in here. I'm doing my best, but I need different inputs." Once you see pain as a message instead of a life sentence, you stop feeling so helpless. You start looking for levers you can actually pull. Second, look at the oils in your life with fresh eyes. Ask yourself a few simple questions. What do I cook with most often? What do I drizzle on my food? Are those oils fresh, or have they been sitting in a hot cupboard for a year? Do they come mainly from deep-fried, ultra-processed foods, or from simple bottles I handle gently at home? Even that basic level of awareness puts you ahead of where most people operate. Third, give your joints a trial period. For the next few weeks, as long as your doctor is on board, you can choose to make one tiny experiment. Swap some of your usual hard or heavily processed fats for a more joint-friendly pattern. A modest amount of high linoleic safflower oil or other quality plant oils, combined with natural sources of omega-3s and plenty of colorful, antioxidant-rich foods. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't chase perfection. Just shift the pattern and watch how your body responds. Pair that with small, repeatable moves. A 5 or 10-minute walk after meals, a few gentle stretches before bed, a more consistent sleep schedule. None of that feels dramatic in the moment, but inside your joints, you're giving the tissue builders better materials, clearer signals, and a quieter, cooler environment to work in. As the days pass, keep paying attention, not with judgment, but with curiosity. How do your knees feel when you get out of a chair? How do your hips feel halfway through the grocery store? How fast does your stiffness fade in the morning compared to a month ago? Those are the real metrics that matter. Not the number of supplements in your cabinet, not the trendiest diet online, but the simple question, do I move through my day with more ease than I used to? If the answer slowly shifts from no to sometimes to actually yes, then you'll know something important has changed under the surface. Your joints didn't magically become new. They simply started getting the message that it's safe to repair instead of constantly defend. You can't bargain away every ache of getting older, but you can stop letting unnecessary inflammation stack extra years on top of the ones you already have. You can support your body with smarter choices, including a low-cost, easy-to-find oil that quietly helps tip the balance toward calm instead of constant irritation. So when you hear the phrase, walk like you're 40 again, don't picture a fantasy version of yourself. Picture the real you, right now, with joints that creak a little less, steps that feel a little smoother, and days where pain is no longer the main character in every story your body tells. That version of you isn't a dream. It's the result of small, consistent choices adding up, and the oil you choose to put on your plate is one of those choices. Give your joints that chance. Give your body that support. And let the simple act of reaching for the right bottle be the quiet moment where the story of how you move begins to change.